Welcome to part two of Q&A. So Brain Parasite Rodney Dangerfield asks, what are your favorite bands / artists? Wow. Well, as far as bands go, kind of like with cinema, I had two different phases with bands, with music. I talked before about how there, the earlier strand of my cinephile days, I was, was when I was just a wide-eyed kid, and movies like Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, and those types of movies. Popcorn adventure movies really, enthralled me at that age, between, say, the age of 9 and 12 or 13. And then when I got around 16 or 17, I started discovering movies like Taxi Driver, and Apocalypse Now, and that was a different phase of my cinephilia. Well, similarly, I guess, I could talk about my music, and now, by the way, I still love both of those kinds of movies. It wasn't a question of turning my back on who I was as a kid, because that kid still lives in me. So I still love the original trilogy of Star Wars and Indiana Jones and other movies of that sort, but also enjoy the weightier kind of meatier kind of stuff, like what you find with Scorsese, or Jim Jarmusch, Stranger Than Paradise, or other arty kind of movies. As far as bands go, I was a big, when I first got into music was probably around at the age of 10 or 11. I think, like everybody else, every other kid in my neighborhood, I had Michael Jackson's Thriller, the album Thriller. I think that just about everybody owned one of those. But I didn't really, I liked a couple songs by Michael Jackson, but I wasn't really a fan. I didn't really get into him as an artist. But the first cassette tape I ever owned was, I can't remember whether it was Rio by Duran Duran or Reach the Beach by The Fix, but either way, both of those bands would, in the early phase of my music appreciation, those were my two favorite bands. Duran Duran really was, I like their first three albums, through everything through Arena, which was a live album, and after that, I thought they fell off, because when they lost lost members, and then their sound kind of changed. But I'm not ashamed to be, during the 80s, you weren't supposed to be a boy and simultaneously like Duran Duran, but I always liked their music. I was never ashamed to say that I was a fan of theirs. So later, I, and then The Fix also, but with them it would again be their first three albums: Shuttered Room, Reach the Beach, which is the one with One Thing Leads to Another, their biggest hit, and Saved by Zero, which is also a pretty big hit, and their third album, Phantoms, was also pretty good. After that, I thought they kind of fell off a little bit, and I wasn't as into them. Later, I would say, in my late teens, around the same time I was digging Martin Scorsese movies, I discovered They Might Be Giants. Became a huge fan of They Might Be Giants. And remained one for a long time, and I still am one, although, my enthusiasm is not what it was when I was, in my 20s. But I just thought they were the shit, man. I thought, like, they're just, as far as combining catchy pop melodies and really clever lyrics, funny, but also engaging lyrics that engage the mind, but in a fun and sometimes satirical kind of way. I think they got lampooned as kind of a joke band, but I don't think that was ever fair. So I was a big fan of They Might Be Giants, and then a little bit later on, Fountains of Wayne, who seemed a little bit to kind of have They Might Be Giants-esque vibe, but just less, less out there. But they liked, having stories or scenarios in their songs that were kind of amusing, and they were also very dedicated to the power pop kind of vibe. I always I became an aficionado of the power pop sound, and also very, I developed a real liking. I mean, I grew up in the midst of new wave, what got called new wave, which was really a bunch of different kinds of music. Like some of it was very synthesizer oriented, some of it was very guitar oriented, but I just really enjoyed, like, the late 70s, early 80s new wave sound. So new wave, power pop, and I think They Might Be Giants came out of that a little bit, even though they were later. They were like, they had their first albums were, I think, in 87 or so. Anna Ang, Birdhouse in Your Soul, those were some of their early hits. I'm trying to think who else qualifies. I got into the Sex Pistols much later, like, when the Sex Pistols actually were around and playing and were together as a band. I was way too young to appreciate them. But when I got in my late 20s, I got I actually purchased Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, and I thought, wow, this is great. This is just sticking it to the authorities, not caring what anybody thinks, not caring about saying the right thing, not the very opposite of virtue signaling. Even though virtue signaling wasn't a phrase that anybody used back then, that seemed like punk at its best was just like that kind of thing, that sort of purposeful, like being offensive, but not just being aimlessly offensive, but being purposefully offensive and for the right reasons. Even though some of it was kind of silly and maybe like a little broad in its like as far as the targets that they chose. Now, I think as an American, you can't. It's harder to understand how mocking the Queen during her during her Jubilee year, how that was really a ballsy thing to do, and that really alienated them from a lot of people. And when it was the number one song, they didn't, like, number one just was blank on the British charts. That's so cool. They just didn't want to give any publicity to it because it was so offensive. Because people love the Queen so much. So and around that same time, I guess I like the early. I'm not a huge rap or hip hop fan, but the early Eminem, the first few albums, the Marshall Mathers LP, the Slim Shady LP, whichever one came after that, I thought they were great. I was sort of in an angry mood, I guess, around, not that that's really changed, but during my late 20s, early 30s, I I just enjoyed. I was like this is the late 90s, so it was like, coming up against political correctness in the first wave or so of it, which is nowhere near as bad as the wave that followed, the waves that have followed. But at the time, it felt like, God, we can't say anything, without getting in trouble. We can't tell the truth about anything. I mean, if only we had known back then how bad it would get. If only in 1999 I had known what 2022 would be like, I would have counted my blessings a lot more. But I loved Eminem just, again, for the same kind of reason that I loved Sex Pistols. That he just, number one, he was extremely clever, verbally dexterous, and would just, was unafraid to just be as offensive as possible. But he did it in a way that was very clever and often very funny. Sometimes really really frightening too, like his song Kim, which I only listened to once and I could never listen to again because it's pretty upsetting. It's all about killing his ex-wife, and it's very graphic. I don't know how graphic a song can be, but it's a very lacerating kind of song. But boy, he was ballsy to do stuff like that. Okay, so let me end my second Q&A there. This became just an extended discussion on music, and there's probably a band or an artist that I've left out that I enjoy. I should also say the what's been called the incel core scene. I really dig it. I really like it a lot. I guess that Shooter or Negative XP wants us to call it E-punk now, but I think incel core is fine. I'm going to stick with incel core. So I again, for the same reason, these are people who are in the midst of all this thought control. They're just based as hell, and like they don't care. And some of it's more clever than others. Some of it's more engaging than others of it, but it's a cool scene. I like it a lot. All right, so I'll end this now and move on. I'll do one more Q&A.